everybody, and welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not writing about various fitness, outdoors, nutrition-related stuff, I'm trying to get outside and adventure as much as I can, which has not been a lot lately, to be honest.
Well, that's too bad. I am Peter Glassford. I'm an endurance coach and I guess registered kinesiologist. I've reversed those today.
Whoa, we're getting a little crazy today.
Well, I've been spending a lot of time working on endurance coaching, so maybe they need to be reversed. Maybe this is my reflection for the year.
Oh boy. Well, on the topic of reflections for the year, we realized since it is, in fact, we just missed American Thanksgiving, it made us start thinking and chatting about what we were thankful for this year, both, with our own sport stuff, but then also, with the podcast. And one of the things we keep coming back to is we're so thankful to all of you guys for listening to these episodes, whether you've been listening since the first episodes that we did back, 2.5 years ago now, or if you've, recently joined us, whatever has it brought you here, we're super thankful that you have been listening. And, one of the best parts of my year, at least, and I'm sure Peter agrees with this, is when we're at races or at events or, even just like online, when we hear from you guys. The amount of times I've been at a race now where someone comes up and mentions a podcast episode is just the coolest thing. I think actually the coolest is when someone realized I was the one doing the online announcing for Cyclocross Reno based on realizing it was my voice that they recognized from the podcast versus, actually seeing my name anywhere.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting meeting people through that and people who have been able to find some sort of interesting thing to listen to on runs or walks or, going through good times or bad times or finding a new sport, inspiration to do some new movement.
Yeah, I think that's been a pretty cool part is hearing, some pretty, I'm going to say stubbornly hardcore cyclists finally start to try, little tiny new things and see some people adapt the morning yoga or the morning walk, anything like that.
Yeah, the yoga and strength's definitely a big part, but I think people have, opened up to the idea that maybe they could try some running, walking a bit more. A couple people, embracing that off season to go play ultimate frisbee or hockey or something like that. And realizing that that's okay, right? Like that's a good part of your athletic identity and in a lot of cases probably helps whatever your main sport is, right? And that's really what this podcast was all about to start off with is, we're all, few of us who listen, some of us who listen are high-end athletes, and thank you to listening as well to all our Olympian friends. But a lot of us aren't getting paid, right? And so, do what you like. It's your own adventure, right? And then also there's the chance that because we all have these varied lifestyles with travel and kids and work and all this stuff, that there's, maybe opportunities for more movement and, dare I say, training by incorporating some of these other sports, right? Like what are the benefits of learning to dribble a soccer ball? I remember back to, what was that, Lauren Sesselman podcast, we talked about dribbling soccer balls. Is there an agility coordination, hand-eye, hand-foot element that might transfer over to other sports, even cycling or running or, trail running, stuff like that, right? And you could do that in your house, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the other themes that's kind of come up a bunch this year has also been this idea of, we all do our training and a lot of us do a lot of it solo, but most people race not necessarily for results. I mean, although the results are nice, it's a lot about the community that they get to see every weekend, during race season. And I had talked back in January, I wrote extensively about this, how my one-word New Year's resolution was community, as in, this idea of really finding new communities in where we live and, working on the communities that I already had and, whether that meant going back to Massachusetts to be part of a road cycling team or, helping out with our off-road cycling club up here in Collingwood, or hanging out with the moms that let me join in for the cross-country runs. All of that kind of came back to this idea of community. And what was cool is it kind of kept coming up with a bunch of the people that we interviewed throughout the course of the year. I mean, Chris McDougall, the man who wrote Born to Run and Natural Born Heroes, one of my favorite authors of all time, I think he spent probably half the episode we did with him talking about, finding other people to be training with and run with, and finding that sense of community in whatever it is that you're doing.
So that was a big part of your, if we call it goal setting for the 2018 season, was based around that community, right? And that, you frame that maybe more as a New Year's resolution, but I think we're talking about a similar process, right? We're talking about how we want the future to manifest. And that could be a very specific, I want to win a certain type of race, but it could also be in our life, right? You can certainly goal set with all these things. And so you used a one-word resolution, a one-word goal to sort of summarize maybe a set of actions or choices that you might make.
Yes, and I will admit that some of the choices made because of said one-word resolution were maybe a little excessive in the name of community, but I think they were all pretty worth it. It's been a pretty awesome year, and like I said, it's cool to hear that it seems like that's becoming more and more popular in why people are training and racing and doing all of these things. So I guess I'll also just add that I'm very thankful for all of the communities that I've gotten to be part of, and the people that we've gotten to talk to that have talked about embracing community. Hopefully, I think we've seen it with some of your clients, some of the people I've worked with. A lot of what keeps you in a sport is really the people who are in it, not so much the results or the numbers or anything like that.
Well, I think, again, we're not getting Olympic medals here, right? Most of us are not getting paid. So there has to be something there on the personal level, personal improvement, pushing your limits. But there also has to be some sort of enjoyment there for most of us. Not everyone values, some of us are exceptionally introverted maybe and don't need that or getting it from other parts of our life. But I think that's a reality, right? So I think for some people that could be a great goal, to sort of invest and stay around after events a bit more or volunteer at events a bit more.
Even on the elite side, actually, what's been interesting in the last couple of years is realizing, for cyclocross specifically, for example, to really make it on a global scale in cyclocross, you pretty much have to go over and live in Europe and race in Europe for the full season. You can't just keep bouncing back and forth. That's just been kind of proven over and over again. But as a racer going over there to live, it's almost impossible to live over there and race well because you're so isolated when you're over there. So you see all these great talents from the US that are still struggling, no matter how many watts they can produce, no matter what they're doing on paper, no matter how they're racing in the US, they still have a really hard time in Europe because there's still a lack of community there for them. So even at the highest level, the community thing really comes into play.
And I think there it's looking at, it's interesting. It sort of reminds me of the conversation I've been having with a few clients around, okay, well, what is the next step? And in some ways, it's almost stepping in the reverse direction, I guess. But the idea that to be a cyclocross racer at that elite level, you need to immerse yourself. And for some people, they're not immersing themselves in whatever. So being an ultra trail runner or a rock climber, they're not quite getting into that. They're not focused on that on a daily, in their daily workout or, all winter thinking about that and preparing for that. Going to enough of those specific types of races, training with people who are also training for those types of races, right? And I guess what I'm thinking is that community sort of feeds into that, right? And that's almost what you're saying with this cyclocross in Europe. It's a very niche Olympic level type application, but you wonder how much of that is similar, right? A familiar term or concept would be, they talk about, I don't know who they are, but experts. When you're trying to lose weight, right? Sometimes you have people in your life that are not so helpful, or if you're trying to start running, right? Like if you get a workout buddy or something like that, right? And how that community can sort of feed into that goal. So that's been a common refrain in some of the end of season reviews. I do sort of a document, and then we usually do a call or an email or a bit of both, and some data analysis with clients. And it's sort of been a refrain for a lot of these clients. We've pushed them as much as we can, ride in the trainer, Zwift, not to pick on that again, but I guess I'll become that guy. Maybe I can get on TV for it or something.
I don't know that anyone is covering that on TV.
What, being like against Swift?
Yeah.
I think I could be that guy. I don't know if I want to, though. They're probably nice people.
They are. Shout out to Swift.
Yeah, maybe. So I'll have to say how much you can do on your own versus getting immersed in a community where then you have this information share, you have this motivation, you have this like daily expected like work capacity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually do get to see that exact thing happen in Europe for, say, the month of January when everyone is living at the USA Cycling like HQ in the Netherlands. You start to see the one guy who goes out for the morning run. The next morning, you start seeing like 2 or 3 guys sort of going out either with him or kind of just behind him. You know, the one guy orders salad or has more salad that night instead of going for like the third helping of pasta, and suddenly, you know, the younger athletes are kind of following along with that. So it's, yeah, the power of community is huge. So if you haven't found yours or you feel like you might need one, maybe that's more where your resolution for next year lies versus, you know, losing 5 pounds or gaining 50 watts or whatever, you know, numerical resolution you were thinking of.
Well, and it might be part of that, right? Again, the way I sort of lay out, you know, we look through the season, clients say, okay, this is what I liked about the season. This is what, you know, I really enjoyed this. It might have been winning the race or doing this race or these type of rides. They find the thing they enjoy, the thing, and then they pick out what did you not enjoy? What was the crappiest moment? Okay, it's probably losing something or not meeting a goal or getting sick at a bad time. You know, and we talk about that. But then eventually we sort of work through this forum, this discussion, and find an outcome goal. So that could be an obvious, you know, I want to place top 100 in this race. I want to get under 9 hours in this endurance race. And then out of that, whatever that outcome is, there's always going to be process or practice goals, is what I would call them. So things you're going to do on the day-to-day or the week-to-week that are going to lead to that, right? So that's sort of what we're talking about here is I'm going to ride with X people or X group once a week because I just know that those are people. You know, we have Paris to Ancaster's a gravel grinder here. Big common goal for masters, especially, is to get in that top 100. I would say a good goal for most people is top 100. And so a good way to do that, we know numbers that are associated with this. It's fairly predictable to train towards that. But a lot of people just don't ride gravel, mixed terrain, and they don't ride with people who are of that caliber. And it can be hard. Like it's not the easiest thing. Like you said, you had to drive to find some of these communities and to find a women's crit team that you could race on. You know, so sometimes it involves driving to ride with people or to train with people, right? But you see all sorts of stories like these people that drive Olympians that drive 4 hours to go train with a certain coach or a certain group.
I feel like that's literally every ice skater ever's bio for some reason.
I think I was going to say it's every speed skater's bio, yeah.
I remember, reading that about so many figure skaters, because when I was a kid, Tara Lipinski was the big figure skater in the U.S., so every book was about figure skaters, and all of them had that going.
Yeah, and that might not be possible for everyone, right? You know, I have lots of clients that live in pretty remote areas, but there's usually some element of that, right? Another common thing that is, you know, we're training for a goal that involves a lot of hills, and people live in very flat areas, right? So A, is that the goal we actually want to go after? You know, are we willing to drive to hills? And then B, okay, that's the goal we want to go after. We need to drive to hills. So it might mean instead of doing a 4-hour ride, like maybe there's some weeks you have to do a 2-hour ride and drive an hour each way to get that training, right? But it's very specific. It's what actually matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like all of that.
Yeah, so that's, I think, when we're looking at this whole episode, which we didn't really intro super well, we're looking, you know, we're thankful. What are we thankful for in the season? And then we're going to take that and review it, right? So how do we turn that into action for next year, right? It's in the past, so it only matters so much, but what are we going to do now, right? And so we thought today that we'd go through some of these common themes and some of these, you know, some of the things that my clients have sort of experienced, some things you've seen.
Yeah, I think the one that both of us kind of accidentally came to this year that I'm gonna flip as a thankful for is that I'm really thankful for being sort of injured, actually. I never thought that would be a thing I would say. I feel like we've had a lot of people on here that talk about how to prevent injury, which obviously would be the ideal situation, but, you know, as it is, my knee has been sort of out. I'm dealing with knee pain stuff. I haven't been able to run for, going on a month now, which is very, very frustrating. But ultimately, I'm trying to think about it as a thing that I'm really thankful for, because it's forcing me to figure out, okay, what's going on, why is this happening, and what are practices that I can put in place in order to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I think, whether in this weird way, I'm actually really happy that this negative thing happened now versus, going another couple of years with I'm not going to foam roll, I'm not going to do any mobility, I'm going to kind of ignore any recovery.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about yours is at least there's some sort of tracing of,
there's a cause and effect.
There's
for sure.
acute chronic ratio. So we always talk about, people go down to training camp and they haven't trained all winter, or if, done 5 hours a week and then all of a sudden they do 5 hours a day. So the acute chronic ratio is a pretty good indicator of injury usually. And so you violated that. You basically went and did a fairly long and hilly gravel grinder with very minimal chronic training load.
Bike training load.
Or hills. So there's an obvious sort of training error there, and then you have a bit of a biomechanical issue that, again, foam rolling and some correctives may and will likely sort of remedy, right? So...
But it brought that to light, I'd say. Like, that gravel grinder situation made me realize that I have these imbalances, that there was just only so long I was going to be able to get away with them. So now I actually have to work on them.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's good. I think you're planning a couple pretty sizable efforts in 2019, right? So the positive may be that these injuries and these pauses that you're having to take are going to prevent, you're going on this 80K self-supported run and getting halfway around and your knee becomes quite an issue, right? So just a reminder, A, you have to train for things, and B, the biomechanics you can only outrun likely for so long unless you're a genetic freak. It is possible to outrun biomechanics, but not everyone can do that.
Sorry, 2.5 years, and I still have not learned that one should train for the event that she is trying to do.
2.5.
2.5 years of doing this podcast where we talk about how to be super smart, intelligent athletes.
Yeah. So,
and you've had your own...
Yeah, I mean, for a year that started so poorly, this time last year, I was battling with this crazy, elbow rash became just by the time we were in Belgium for a couple weeks, and then I got this just horrible full body hives that broke out, and this elbow that just went berserk, and I was up all night for most of the trip just itching.
Super fun to be around.
And dealt with itching from basically late October, I guess. Was it late October through till well into the new year? I think it finally subsided maybe towards February.
I don't even know that it had completely... I'd say it was May before we found any resolution.
Then certainly to get rid of the actual rash on my elbow. And so that was crazy. My arm stopped working basically, around Christmas and stuff, zero training and a couple rounds of antibiotics. So it was pretty rough, probably the roughest I've ever, and certainly the itch. So I think I'm thankful that I got to experience just not being able to move and getting to the point where I was so tired and so demotivated that I got to the point where you understand when someone's really down and you're oh, well, if they just moved, just go out for a walk, right? It's not always that easy. So I think it was a good experience to go through to understand what a privilege it is to be a little bit spastic and sort of, I always have to move a little, I like to move, and then being able to, right?
Yeah.
So that was, and then on the flip side, to be able to experience coming back to pretty good form, having a nationals race in July that went really, really well. And then a provincials, I ended up winning. So, I mean, as far as the year went, I came back from again, January, February, March, not amazing training, to really a pretty solid season. I would say better than the last couple seasons.
And it's funny because I've now talked to a few athletes on this podcast and for other interviews who've all had kind of similar things, maybe not quite that rashy, but where they've, been doing pretty well, everything's going okay, and then they actually have an injury that knocks them out of the sport or out of training for, 1 to 4 months, say. And they come back and they're more motivated, they're stronger, they're smarter. It's just a really common thread. I was just talking to an ultra runner, Casey Lichtig, and she actually had a similar knee thing to what I had, but she ran through it until she actually fractured her pelvis. And I'm hoping to get her on to talk about that. But it took her 8 months to kind of come back, but she's running faster and better than ever because she's so happy to be back to running. So it's kind of amazing.
Did she have osteopenia, or why did it break?
No, it was because she ran through 2 knees, like runner's knees that like swelled up to grapefruit size, and she was just doing crazy run gait patterns and weakening stuff, and then she fell during a race.
Oh, so there was like an acute.
Yeah.
Okay.
So chronic load and then an acute incident. But if she had just stopped and let her knees recover, the odds of that happening would actually have been much, much lower. So, she's kind of now learned that lesson, but she's also just super stoked to be back to running. And I've heard that from a few people.
Yeah, and I think that gave me respect, or at least appreciation for downtime and just taking care of your health first, which has always been part of my philosophy of coaching, but I think sort of added and reiterated that.
Easier said than done too, right?
Yeah, for sure. But that, and then just the importance of throughout the season, I think the other thing I did really well was just really focusing on quality. And that sometimes meant like one workout that was even a workout all week, but I made damn sure like I was focused on, for me, it's just really that start, like the critical moments in the races for me are the start, right? The hard part. And then I can always keep, like the average speed is never, it's like the hard efforts, 2 minutes off the start, the 2 minutes that make the race, and then you just hold on, right? So just that really top end stuff, and the only way to train that, especially given my years of training, you just have to be recovered to put that much load into it. So yeah, so I think just being ready for that, and I think that was a lot of the reason I had anything at nationals. And then nationals, we made sure, even though we drove out, that we took that week pretty relaxed and no crazy extra things going on. And then provincials was okay. It was sort of crazy with Ellen's camp leading into it, but I guess good vibes and hanging out with a lot of really strong independent ladies.
It's where we had the best races of our season after that. So.
True. Yeah.
Something in the water in Western Mass.
So what else? What else do we have here as far as goal setting?
So what I wanted to talk to you about is you're currently in the middle of doing a ton of your end of season reviews with clients. So for people who, don't necessarily have a coach that's going to hop on the phone with them for an hour, I'd love to hear, how can someone do an end of season review for themselves, and kind of taking into account this idea of being thankful, but, how can you look back at your year and what are you assessing?
I mean, I think you can probably find, we've had Danielle Kabush, we've had a few people on, so I would listen to some of those podcasts we've had on around sports psych. I also have an intake form that has some sort of built-in goal setting in it, so if you just want to fill it out, you don't have to even press send if you don't want to, or you can and just sort of ghost me after. And you can also book a call. The calls are only $25, so you can definitely do that, and you can talk to me about your goals, and I can let you know what I think.
So that's all at smartathlete.ca.
Yeah, but I think more globally, I think just looking at the season past, what did you intend to do, and did it happen? And then sort of think through, and I think this could be a very open journaling exercise, right? Like get a blank page. What did you want to do this year? For some people, a lot of times when I talk to people, we haven't really set an actual goal, and that may be appropriate. It might have been, I'm just going to participate in X race series this year. I'm a beginner racer, and that's fine. But at the end of the year, sometimes it's when you set that sort of like, okay, you participated in the races, check mark, you did it. And then sometimes you feel like, oh, that would maybe undershot, right? So maybe you do need to put a little more a qualifier on that. So a lot of things, what I'll do is I'll look at how close were you to winning or upgrading or different things like that. Those are the common sort of sport expert goals, right? Or I either want to get closer to winning or on the podium or win or upgrade. So we sort of look at that and how far away are you? A lot of races, you can sort of calculate a percent back from the leader or the place you want to be. I talked about top 100 at Paris de Ancaster. And that is a pretty common, like if you have a few races, you'll see like I'm almost always 10 to 15%, or 10% off. And then now you have to get 10% better in a lot of different areas, right? So ride 10% more, increase your power outputs by 10%, learn more skills if that's relevant to your discipline. It probably is. Strength training could be 10%, and just try and think in those percentages. It's a pretty rough way to go about it, but if you can get 10% better, and as a beginner, that should be no brainer. Then you can see how that goal, right? And that gets back to that process goal of, power outputs, skills, right? You could get quite mathematical about it and pretty calculated.
I was going to ask, when you're talking to your clients, for example, do you go more like qualitative or quantitative?
That's a good question. And so I think it depends on the person, right? Mm-hmm. I usually try and pull people back towards the center, I think, right? So you have your people that don't have a lot of data, and so it's very nebulous, but we have a lot of feelings, which are good. But sometimes it's very hard, right? Like you feel, but you can't really, where do you get the results? So that's where, if you don't have any power or pace times for running or things like that, if that person has never collected data, right? Or they're not a power person, they're not a data person, then you can pull that from race results maybe and sort of pull them back to, okay, well, let's try and figure this side of things out, right? Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, I have a lot of people who are very data oriented, and we have to add a bit of feelings to that, right? Because there's usually feelings there just as there's data there, just so we have a balanced approach, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that there's sort of three things. I've been saying this a lot lately. The clients that do the best are the ones that are willing to be focused every day. So not necessarily work hard every day, but be focused every day for even whatever that is, half an hour. The clients also collect some sort of data, and whatever that means for their development and their sport. And they log that reliably, and they have an attention to it. So for a runner with no major data, it might just mean they go to the same hill and they're willing to do a bit of monotonous work so that we know times around a loop or up a hill. It might also mean a power meter. It might also mean pace. And then they also add qualitative. So they add some feeling to that. I felt good today. I ran with Molly today. I, hate this workout.
Hate Molly today.
Right? And so once you have those three things reliably, it's very rare for someone not to do well.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, next question about your end of season stuff, because I find this end of season review is honestly like so much more important in a lot of ways than even setting the goals for next year. Because if you don't have this process ahead of figuring out next year's goals, you're never actually getting closer to them, I don't think.
Yeah, I guess I sort of wrap them up together.
Yeah.
But what do you mean you're not getting closer?
Well, if you don't ever sit down and think about how did this go, I think the best example of this is I'm going to say 20 years now. If you asked me what I wanted to do body-wise, I would say I wanted to lose 5 pounds. Could not tell you what I weigh at the beginning of the year. Could not tell you what I weigh right now. Don't know. But you know what? I would still probably end up saying my New Year's resolution would be to lose 5 pounds. I've gotten smarter in the last few years. But, from probably 11 years old till I was 25, 26, that would have been my goal, despite the fact that I did not keep any track of it, any log of it, have any plans around it. It was just always this weird nebulous goal. So if you don't actually take the time to stop and think about how the goal went, you're just going to keep ending up saying the same goal kind of over and over again and never actually getting there, or not getting there as effectively. Or you just keep doing the same wrong things, or things that aren't giving you the 10% because you didn't really think about it.
It's a common goal, I guess, body composition, right? If we think about an athlete population, and I try and push, that's one of the questions in my form is, tell me about yourself as an athlete. I've stole that from the Brave Athlete people largely. Because my goal is to get everyone thinking like an athlete. But not everyone thinks about that. It's surprising, actually, the answers to that question are some people who I think should, are quite athletic and training is part of their life. They have a hard time. And so that's a discussion then to have, right? There's obviously some feelings behind that. And what would make you feel more like an athlete, right?
Okay, so my question
I know,
that I ended up accidentally...
is the weight loss.
No, that wasn't my question.
Oh, because I was going to say, first what I would do is, does this person, I would look in the background, like, does this person actually need to lose weight, or is there a body composition, like, leanness that we need to go after? Are the results not sufficient? Then I would ask them more about why. Like, why do you want to lose 5 pounds? Like, what's going to happen when you lose 5 pounds?
Which, again, I couldn't answer because I couldn't tell you how much I weighed to begin with.
I mean, the actual goal you have for this season, if I try and verbalize your goals for you.
Somebody's got to.
Yeah, I mean, you want to do ultra runs that involve large hills. So there is a power to weight. There's an obvious power to weight with that. But there's also a health. And in ultra running, like, you have to be able to not get sick and also absorb a lot of impact. So there's sort of this, like, odd, balance where the weight is going to slow you down and also add impact, but it's also going to make you more resilient. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good, especially with younger people, but really with anyone, if it's close, then I think that's where it's sort of good enough when you start going after more the performance. So for a runner, you could look at their VAM, like how fast they're running uphill, or just the amount they're climbing is usually it's just way too low and they need to climb more. So now all of a sudden you need to climb more. The more you become an uphill runner, the more you'll look like an uphill runner. Dean Golich, the episode with that one, we asked him about power to weight for cyclists, and specifically with females. And that was his answer was, if the power goes up, it'll just go that way almost always. Mm-hmm. And then the other question would be, well, what did you do this year to lose 5 pounds? Like, did you have a plan? Like, what was the thing you changed?
Are you actually asking me? Because I was just trying to give, like, an example.
Well, I guess, like, so if nothing changed in your behavior, right? And that's again, when we're looking at these practice or process goals, it's what is the behavior that we're going to change? So for you, it might be, okay, I drink cola every day.
I do not.
So then it'd be, okay, well, maybe we're going to switch over. We're going to get ourselves a sparkling water machine, and we're just going to drink water.
This might be Peter's ploy to get us a soda water
thing. But again, if your goal is you think 5 pounds is going to make you the best runner and a happy person, okay, interesting. Why? Let's explore that. Maybe there's some odd feelings that we need to dig deeper on. But if you're like, it probably would make you better as a runner, let's try this theory. What is the process goal that we're going to do? Well, low-hanging fruit, you're drinking cola and 2 glasses of milk. I would probably pull those out.
Also not doing that.
Pull those out and then continue to train, run uphill more, train effectively, sleep, and away you go.
Yes.
Goal setting.
I think what I was trying to say, completely not really the question I had asked.
Okay, well, you had another goal, so let's look at this other goal. It was related to your athlete self.
No.
I'm pretty sure that's what the goal was.
That was not a thing.
Okay, what was the goal?
Well, my point here was going to be that if you don't have this end of year conversation where you talk about, okay, our point was to, drop down on the soda or XYZ, did we execute on it? Then, like, if you try to go set a new goal for next year without thinking about what you did this year and what worked and what didn't, you're just kind of be in this weird cycle of resetting the same goal over and over without even knowing what's working and what isn't. So that's why the end of the year thing is very important.
Yeah, and do you have more?
I do have more.
Okay.
Well, I was going to ask you 2 questions. One would be how do you deal with a client who has a really good year and is really happy with their end of year review? And then how do you deal with someone who's really not happy with how their year went? Because both present sort of interesting challenges, right? Mm-hmm.
Yep. I mean, I think both are very important. I think everyone, ideally, I would talk to and work through this process, because I think there's a lot of things that the athlete knows that the coach obviously doesn't, or maybe not obviously, but the coach doesn't know, right? Because you're with yourself all the time.
Yeah, it's very annoying.
So there could be feelings, right? Like I could think, oh wow, like this data looks amazing. This is the best like power, the power's all increased, this went perfect. They won. And then it could be like, oh, this is the worst season ever. And it's like there's feelings behind that for whatever reason, right? Like the race wasn't as hard as they thought it was going to be. It was an easy win or something, right? Or they had another number in their head. They wanted that CP20 to be even higher, but it is like you won.
They wanted to lose 10 pounds instead of 5.
It could be any of these things, right? So it's that. And then I think you also have to be careful of that the quote unquote post Ironman burnout, right? So I won provincials. I'm the king of provincials, or what is my title? The provincial world champion. So now what?
I don't know. He hasn't stopped crying since, so I'm not really sure how he's going to answer
So
that.
now what, right? So I had a client, I think I referenced this on the last podcast, just finished a big stage race. It's been his, like, not life's goal, but it's been a couple of seasons. He's had to deal through, a couple lifestyle things, a couple injuries, finally got things put together. We did it. Went great. But now what? Right? And so that is an important conversation because we need to get back on the horse and doing something, right? It might be, for some people, maybe you don't. Maybe you need to go in another part of life, right? And you're going to focus on career or family or whatever. Some people it might be a different discipline, switching from cyclocross to gravel, and that's fine too. And some people it might just be, I'm provincial champion now. I just want to do that again next year. And what am I going to do to get that CP20 up or that, and then you set goals around that. I think for some of my masters, like you get to the peak of some of these categories. And if you're not willing to travel or there is no upgrade, you end up like topping out, right? And who are you chasing now? So some of them end up winning by, they're just out front by 5 minutes. And it's like, okay, well, what do you do now?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I think this actually all kind of does circle back a little bit to the kind of key point of this idea of being thankful too. Is when someone has had a bad season or even a great season that they're feeling bad about, kind of coming to what did go well this season, what can we be thankful for, Okay, so you don't have anyone that you're racing because you're ahead by 5 minutes. Like, let's be thankful that you've raised your power to that point where you can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely, like I say, that's a question for both people. All the times people that I have go through this process, what went well and what went bad? What could we improve on, right? Like there's got to be something we can improve on. And some people, or everyone's on one side of that equation. Some people are very good at pulling out positives. Some people, like I'm not great at pulling out positives a lot of the time for myself. I'm very oriented on like, oh, this is what I could do better. And that's served me relatively well. But at some point you need to reflect on the positives too, right? So you asked about the person who doesn't have a good year.
Yeah, how do you talk them around to figuring out what they are thankful for and what they're happy about?
There's usually something there, right? I think sometimes there's expectations, like you say, that weren't, either the goal was just so bold, right? It wasn't maybe the goal that should have been set, maybe a little ambitious. But I think a lot of times it's, again, finding something in the power, something in the, this community is a good place to start. Things that, why are you participating? We get back to that why, right? Often it has nothing to do with the medal at the local race, right? Maybe the goal was to win the local race, but all of that is very subject to who shows up and how life goes, right? And so for a big subset of my clients, it's, power numbers look okay. They did the best they could with, life and what's thrown at them. And then, they went to the race and had a great time and the community's really good and they had a blast and the family came and everyone had a good time and everyone got home safe. Sometimes that's good. You live to fight another year, right? And maybe next year life's more chill, right? And then you build on that, right? And what was the good thing, what didn't work, and then you can set, again, that outcome process goal off of that. And sometimes that, okay, I didn't get the goal, and that sometimes is a nice point for reflection. Like, do I set a different goal, different discipline? You know, instead of top 100, maybe I'm a top 200 person for now. Or, you know, do you just try again and, okay, it's obvious. Like, I just didn't train this year. I didn't think I needed to, and apparently you need to train.
I have heard that.
You know, and that's tongue in cheek, but, you know, sometimes it's just like, you know, we set the goal of training this much or this hard or this type of training, and it just didn't happen. You never drove to a hill. You never rode a hill, and this race was an uphill race. Next year, if that's the goal, then, you know, there we go. And there's that obvious cause and effect, and then sometimes there's a reason for the cause and effect, and sometimes it just, you know, we fall off track. So,
awesome.
Yeah, hopefully there's something there.
I think so. So I think we're going to wrap up on that one. So again, just thank you so much to everybody who listens to the show and who has been listening. We love and appreciate you very much. And actually, we'd also really like to hear about your end of season wrap-ups. You know, how did your season go? Is there stuff you're super excited about? Is there a new sport that you're dying to try for next year? Is there a new goal you have in mind? Is there something, you know, doing your end of season goal setting and looking back and everything? Is there something you realize that you need to shift or want to start changing? You know, let us know. Comment, let us know on Twitter at Peter Glassford or at Molly J. Herford. Like Peter said, smartathlete.ca has a ton of really good resources for that. Whether you just want to, you know, see what an input form looks like, or if you want to book a consult with either of us, we're both open for that. And I think, yeah, that's about it. So happy belated Thanksgiving, everyone. And we will be back with our regularly scheduled programming next week. Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.